Welcome to Grayprimer, a show that's mostly about miniatures. My name is Nick, I'm your host, and in this episode I'm going to be doing another movie-inspired Warhammer diorama. I've already completed a Jaws-inspired orc fishing trip, and a King Kong-inspired Titan diorama. I'll add links to these videos into the show notes below, and while you're down there having a rummage, why not like, share, and subscribe? Your support helps me to keep making these crazy dioramas, and I appreciate each and every one of you. And this time I'm heading out west to reimagine one of my favorite movies of all time, 1960's The Magnificent Seven. This project has taken 3 months to complete, but it's finally done, so tighten the straps in your chaps and buckle on your 6-shooter, and join me as I turn 7 dreadnoughts from 7 chapters into the maladjusted and murderous Mechnificent Seven. Dreadnoughts have always been my favourite unit in Warhammer 40,000, so it's no surprise that I have a few of them knocking around my hobby hut. It also helps that the Age of Darkness box came with a Contemptor Dreadnought, and Leviathan had a Ballistus. Add to that a Leviathan Siege Dreadnought, a Derideo, a Brutalis, a Venerable, and a Furioso that's so old I threw out the box many years ago, and you have yourself 7 wonderful machines. Kitbashing is one of my favourite parts of this hobby, and having a deep bits box full of eclectic bric-a-brac is a good way to spark ideas when you're planning things out. The only danger is that it's very easy to get distracted when you're burrowing amongst the sprue shrapnel. I have no idea where most of this stuff comes from, but it's a delight to explore. My Contemptor Dreadnought is going to be an Ultramarine, so I didn't want to make it look too flamboyant, but I like the look of this little banner, and don't worry, I'll take off all the Xenos symbols before I start to paint it. And that's the opposite of what I'll do with this Dark Angel's Ghost Glaive, which he pried from the cold dead fingers of an Eldar Wraith Knight. This is one Dreadnought who walks a fine line between honor and heresy. It seems a bit macabre, but I did have to shave off the Wraith Knight's hand and fingers here. I also shortened the Ghost Glaive a little bit to make it look more appropriately sized to this Dreadnought. The Imperial Fist is much less heretical, but perhaps even more flamboyant than the Dark Angel. It has a massive standard attached to the armor top plate, which I think came from an Age of Sigmar Ogre originally. Both arms are stolen from an Invictus tactical warsuit, and I think this one looks deadly, even at this early stage in the process. When I do battle damage effects on miniatures, I find that actually physically damaging them with knives, clippers, and drills is so much more convincing than trying to fake it with some kind of paint technique. For me, it's an experience that is equal parts satisfying and disturbing. Like, I know the end result will be worth it, but I love miniatures and doing this to them seems like cruel and unusual punishment. From the perspective of my own physical safety, this is often the part of my process when I most commonly damage myself, but I suppose that's karma. My painting approach for these dreadnoughts was to use strong base colors followed by subtle highlights and shading, and then absolutely go to town on the battle damage, weathering and wear later on. AK Intense is a great choice for a bold, deep color due to its high pigment density. And I also love that they're really well emulsified, so as a result they rarely need much mixing and shaking up. They're probably the best paints I've ever used, and I hope they expand this intense range in the near future. And there were a lot of painting firsts for me in this project, as I'd never before painted a Salamander, a Space Wolf, an Iron Hand, or an Ultramarine, amazingly. And I have to reluctantly admit that painting the Ultramarine was the most satisfying experience overall, as the gold detailing just looks amazing against the Ultramarine blue. They just combine so well together. I also dig the red detailing against the green with the Dark Angel. My favourite hack for purity seals is Citadel's Blood for the Blood God on the wax, and Contrast Skeleton Horde for the parchment, also from Citadel Paints. So easy and quick, and I think it's super effective. I own a lot of brassy gold paints, but Citadel's Retributor Armor is one I go back to time and time again. It's got a nice warm tone, gives great coverage, and it really pops against blue tones. I can't recommend it enough. I like the look of Citaden's Iyanden Yellow contrast as a shade for AK's Intense Yellow. I struggle a little with painting yellow, but I'm gradually getting more comfortable. This pair of Vallejo Greys are nice highlights for the ornamental skull detail I added to the Salamander. And while I'm talking about the Salamander, I gotta say that I love doing the flame details on it. I don't do a lot of freehand work, but this felt like a gentle introduction, and the end result isn't the worst thing I've ever painted. I also made the laurel wreath detailing a bit flamey too, and these scrolls and wings on the chest armor are beautifully sculpted details in the Deredeo, and really impress me. I like to shade metalwork with a mix of different black inks. I find it's an easy way to add contrast, and I really enjoy detailing the Space Wolves Dreadnought. When I want to show chipped paint on metal surfaces, I use a mix of the Vallejo metal color silver and steel. I apply it with a bit of ripped up sponge, and this is the same technique I use on my scuffed up tanks. Working out which water slide decals to use and where to put them always takes a bit of planning. I identify and measure which surfaces need a decal, and then dig through my mountain of decal sheets to find the right ones for the job. As a side note, I have to say that I adore the big Forge World sheets, but the mighty brush have been doing some cracker decals as well. And my brand new Tamiya decal scissors are just the coolest thing. I needed to put pins into the feet of each miniature so that they'd be easier to attach to the diorama base, and I used this Florus wire. And hey, check out the pink version of Bostic's Blue Tack, and also look at how pretty this Ultramarine is. And I can't believe I'm saying that, I feel so ashamed as a lifelong Blood Angels fan. I use a pin vise to drill a hole in each foot, and super glue in a bit of wire. Alright, now onto the diorama base and background. I wanted to replicate the look of this Mechnificent Seven poster, but I couldn't have all of the Dreadnoughts standing shoulder to shoulder like this, as they're just much too chonky and wide. But at the very least I could focus on getting the environmental colours right, and I did a small scale test before moving on to the much larger sheet that I'd use in the diorama. I think this is a close enough representation. It doesn't need to be perfect at this test stage either. It just needs to give the feel of the original. Big blocks of 40mm XPS foam make up the diorama base, and I glued on a cheap skinny chopping board to act as a reinforcing layer. I actually got a multi-pack of these from a supermarket for next to nothing. I used a mix of PVA glue, plastic putty, and foam-safe Yoo-hoo glue to stick this all together and fill in any gaps. In order to get the feel of the original poster, I mocked up a frame in Photoshop that shows the adjusted name and tagline on the top, as well as all of the Dreadnought names and chapters on the bottom. And here you're seeing the very first full component test, which led me to actually narrow the aperture window a bit. And here's the scaled up painted background, and all of the foam core and card inserts and diorama walls. I find that tests like this are critical steps to take before I fully commit to the last part of a build. I make a lot less mistakes when I take a little time to dry fit all the components. A little strip of double-sided tape holds the curved background in place, and this should give the impression of depth to the diorama. Off camera I also sprayed the ground with PVA glue, sprinkled on some Geek Gaming Scenics base ready grit. And with the Dreadnought feet suitably dusty with pigment powder, I can call this one done. Here's Bjorn the Fell-Handed of the Space Wolves. Here's Markol Ruman of the Iron Hands chapter. And Morleo Moriar of the Blood Angels Death Company. Here's the flamboyant Lord Dantor of the Imperial Fists. And Cassian Dracos as Salamander's Deredeo. Here's the Leviathan Dreadnought Severus of the Ultramarines. And finally, the definitely not heretical at all, Talos of the Dark Angels. I really hope I've captured the essence of films like The Mechnificent Seven, Seven Samurai, Kelly's Heroes, and even A Bug's Life by gathering a mismatched group of individuals who have overcome their differences to transform into an effective team that wins against the odds. I like to think of these dreadnoughts all crammed into a Stormbird and roaming the galaxy in search of besieged Imperial citizens to save. Just imagine all 7 of them clanking out of a Stormbird's front hatch, and then imagine the mixed looks of horror and hope on the faces of the Imperial citizens as they gaze upon these near mythical and hulking ancient warriors. And while Yulbrynner and co may well have fought like 700, the Mechnificent Seven fight like 7,000. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please let me know what you think in the comments below, and what movie I should be trying to recreate next. Thanks so much for spending some time with me today. Take care, bye bye.